Welcome to the RCV Thursday Cup in flooded Adelaide. Dom Payne starts from pole, desperate for the championship lead. Anthony, these heavy Opala V8s face brutal aquaplaning.
Spot on, Martin. Throttle application on this soaked concrete is an absolute nightmare. The mandatory consecutive pit stops will strictly dictate our strategy throughout this dangerous opening stint.
Payne immediately darts aggressively toward the inside line. Payne aquaplanes, he tags the unforgiving concrete barrier. The white and green Manacar machine plummets down the order as the entire frantic pack scatters.
He just blindly reversed right into Norchi's Haveline Opala, appalling spatial awareness from Payne.
Despite triggering that absolute melee, the desperate championship contender somehow scrabbles his battered car out of the puddle and manages to drag himself ahead of poor Clinton Norchi for 7th place overall. Clinton is absolutely incandescent on the team radio right now, furiously dubbing our pole sitter, "Dodge him, Dom, you simply cannot blame him after his race was compromised by such careless driving manoeuvres."
Payne knows Javib is miles away in that loud Spanish tapas bar today. The opportunity to seize the standings has completely clouded Dom's judgment, leading to this overly aggressive, destructive opening lap. Clinton recently ditched his vintage keyboard for a proper wheel and pedal setup, but adapting his brand new analog muscle memory on these treacherously flooded streets has become an absolute digital nightmare.
After his clever psychological tactics failed miserably back in Estoril, Dom has clearly abandoned all subtlety. He is engaging in straightforward physical warfare against the unforgiving barriers and his furious racing rivals. Sitting quietly amidst this chaos is the dark grey Dymet machine of MTG. The paddock rumours suggest this silent assassin actually prepared by sleeping inside a pitch black sensory deprivation tank this weekend.
Contrast that serene focus with Daniel Bourne in 6th. His telemetry displays massive frantic inputs. He is bizarrely attempting to fundamentally reinvent his established driving technique right amid this torrential Australian downpour.
And then we have Alpha Quad, fresh from terrorising children on Portuguese bumper car mats. He considers these perilous concrete walls nothing more than very helpful steering assist. MTG twitches widely across the treacherous final corner. Alpha Quad immediately pounces on that rare slip from the silent assassin. The former arcade champion mercilessly bullies his dark blue Refrescentro Opala past MTG to brilliantly secure 2nd position overall right now.
That momentary loss of traction happens when a tyre clips an unseen puddle, instantly shifting the heavy Opala's weight distribution. However, despite dropping a spot, I guarantee MTG's resting heart rate hasn't spiked a single beat. He remains perfectly calm and highly composed.
Unfazed by his earlier mistake, MTG has quietly regrouped and is now meticulously stalking Rafin for 4th place. He is neatly positioning his car directly inside the spray, trailing from the back of that brightly coloured Soltox racing machine today.
Rafin has really struggled with mechanical gremlins lately, and wrestling a massive V8 through these slick streets is exhausting. Having an emotionless driver like MTG hovering mere inches from your rear bumper only magnifies that intense cockpit stress even further.
Payne elbows his way past Holderney for 6th as yellow flags wave. The Caramel Chic Bandeirante completely loses rear grip and spins into an escape road before cautiously rejoining the muddy track.
Poor Holderney genuinely looks terrified out there today. The erratic driving standards he frequently faces in the midfield have clearly scarred him. He's braking terribly early, avoiding every single rumble strip, and essentially viewing this perilous flooded session as an exercise in sheer survival rather than a competitive motor race against these extremely aggressive wildcards right out here today.
Having recovered his composure after that disastrous opening lap crash, the recovering pole sitter has now firmly latched himself onto the rear bumper of MTG. The desperate mastermind is patiently assessing where this dark grey machine might be most vulnerable.
Payne is skillfully shifting his braking points, intentionally showing his nose in the mirrors just to unsettle MTG before the tighter technical track sections.
Tomo paces this treacherous field, leading Alpha Quad, Bourne, Rafin, MTG, recovering Payne, Holderney and poor Norchi. But look at Dom Payne, he is visibly throwing caution out the window, sliding that heavy Opala remarkably close to the concrete barriers just to maintain contact with the silent assassin today.
Dom knows perfectly well that a solid finish here guarantees him the championship lead while Javib sits in Spain. This incredible desperation is making him overdrive slightly. You can literally see aggressive steering corrections every time he applies the throttle.
He is searching for absolutely any microscopic opening. Payne dances nervously across the standing water, peering down the inside, then darting back outside, furiously attempting to distract MTG enough to force a catastrophic error on these extremely slippery painted lines.
Tucking into the slipstream is incredibly dangerous right now. The spray kicked up by those massive rear tyres completely obliterates forward visibility. Payne is relying purely on memory and MTG's faint taillights to determine his braking zone for the hairpin.
The pressure is absolutely relentless. Dom refuses to yield a single inch to this stealthy dark grey machine through these lethal canyons. He lunges from miles back. Payne throws the methodical Opala aggressively toward the apex. They are briefly side by side through the blinding spray, but Dom bravely forces the issue and mercilessly elbows the silent assassin out of his path. What a brilliant, aggressive recovery manoeuvre to snatch fifth position back after that disastrous opening lap embarrassment we witnessed earlier today. Now hunting Rafin.
Rafin stubbornly defends the preferred inside line, bravely forcing Payne out into the deeper, treacherous puddles.
But Dodge and Dom simply will not be denied. He brilliantly wraps his green and white machine right around the outside, maximising traction where nobody else dares to tread, and forcibly wrestles fourth place away. The mastermind is on an absolute rampage to reclaim his rightful spot at the very top of the championship standings.
Watching MTG behind Rafin is fascinating. While Payne just muscled his way through violently, MTG is purely analytical. He's deliberately hanging back slightly, calculating precisely where Rafin's overheated V8 lacks forward traction.
That zen-like patience is genuinely terrifying for anyone checking their mirrors. MTG does not merely execute overtakes, he methodically stalks his prey until he completely suffocates their remaining will to bravely fight.
You can physically hear Rafin's struggling engine screaming for mercy on the straights. He is desperately wrestling a mechanically wounded Opala, while the emotionless assassin relentlessly stalks his weary gearbox.
They plunge toward the incredibly treacherous hairpin. MTG glues his dark grey machine right against Rafin's bumper, refusing to let him breathe. This psychological warfare is absolutely spellbinding as we witness contrasting philosophies clashing dramatically across the severely flooded streets of this very unforgiving South Australian racing street circuit.
Notice how MTG isn't frantically weaving like Payne did earlier. He stays firmly planted in the safest grooves, preserving his delicate wet tyres while letting Rafin's growing anxiety naturally induce an inevitable mistake under these extremely heavy braking zones today.
The pressure is building to a boiling point. Rafin desperately wrestles the steering wheel, fighting both his ailing machinery and the terrifyingly calm presence of MTG constantly looming in his rearview mirrors.
The mental strain inside that cockpit must be entirely overwhelming right now. Driving defensively inevitably forces you off the optimal racing line, meaning Rafin is repeatedly dipping his tyres into deeper standing water. MTG recognises this vulnerability instantly. His ruthless efficiency in these treacherous wet conditions is exactly what makes him a true, formidable modern championship contender.
They snake through the narrow concrete canyon sections incredibly close together. The dark grey nose of MTG's machine seems permanently tethered to the blue and red Soltox bumper of his desperate rival. The silent assassin is orchestrating a masterful display of sustained psychological torment on this terribly flooded street circuit today. Tomo continues pacing Alpha Quad, Bourne, Payne, Rafin, MTG, Holdeny and Norchi. The action, however, remains fixed firmly on MTG. He tucks neatly into the slipstream of fifth place, maximising the tow down the straight before gently stepping out to display his nose just inches from Rafin's nervous car door.
Tucking into the slipstream reduces aerodynamic drag, allowing MTG to effortlessly maintain top speed without overworking his tyres. He is forcing Rafin to needlessly burn extra fuel and rubber just to desperately defend his highly vulnerable position out on track.
They sweep through the fast chicane. The gap is virtually non-existent. MTG's shadowy presence is like an absolute nightmare that Rafin simply cannot wake up from. Every minor slide from the Soltox Opala is mirrored flawlessly by the dark grey machine tucked menacingly beneath its roaring rain-soaked rear wing right now.
Further back, yellow flags. It is poor Clinton Norchi. He has spun his Javelin machine and is frantically grappling with his brand new wheel setup, agonisingly struggling to locate the reverse gear amidst the blinding spray before finally dragging himself safely back onto the racing circuit.
Returning to the critical battle, MTG completely dominates the rearview mirrors of fifth place. His methodical approach is relentlessly grinding down Rafin's defences on a brutally slippery and terrifyingly fast racing circuit.
You really have to feel deep sympathy for Clinton Norchi. That completely unnecessary lap 1 collision from Dodge and Dom utterly shattered his competitive spirit today. He looked entirely overwhelmed, practically hyperventilating inside the cockpit while frantically mashing buttons, just attempting to simply reverse his digital car out of that deeply flooded concrete runoff area on the track.
Up ahead, MTG has zero sympathy for anyone. The silent assassin continues tightly chaining his dark grey chassis to Rafin's exhaust pipes. He stubbornly refuses to permit even a fraction of a second of breathing room through these treacherous puddles. MTG dives alongside Rafin, violently locks up, panics entirely and aggressively pitches his own heavy car squarely into the unforgiving wall. The silent assassin glides gracefully past without making any physical contact.
He did not lay a single finger on him. That crash was caused by pure agonizing psychological damage. The relentless, suffocating pressure from MTG simply shattered Rafin's mental resolve completely out there.
That rumoured sensory deprivation training is absolutely paying dividends today. MTG projects literally zero emotion from the cockpit, which terrifies his highly anxious rivals until they inevitably crumble into scattered mental pieces. Meanwhile, Payne has fully locked his aggressive sights onto Daniel Bourne in third. Will Bourne's bizarre, ongoing existential driving crisis transform him into a vulnerable target or an unpredictable defensive racing threat?
Telemetry confirms Bourne shockingly messaged his race engineer stating, "I need to be water, show absolutely no resistance. Let us see if that highly unusual philosophical strategy actually succeeds properly out there."
Unfortunately for Daniel, Payne certainly isn't water. He is a brutally swinging sledgehammer. The desperate mastermind is methodically and violently dismantling this entire flooded grid to steal the overall racing championship lead.
Alpha Quad, currently running securely in second place, is absolutely relishing this chaotic atmosphere. He seemingly believes he is back at the Cascades arcade, merrily trading heavy paint without facing major mechanical consequences.
Meanwhile, race leader Tomo sits precisely where he intends to be. The notorious rain stalker is smoothly dictating the pace, watching the vicious battles erupt behind him and patiently waiting for these highly aggressive championship contenders to inevitably drown in the treacherous puddles. Payne has now arrived squarely on Bourne's gearbox. The recovering pole sitter is swarming all over the rear of that blue and white Moeller's Hush machine, relentlessly searching for the perfect striking distance as they navigate these terrifyingly slick chicanes.
Payne relies on extremely late braking to aggressively intimidate his rivals. Bourne must ignore those diving manoeuvres to maintain a steady rhythm.
Tomo currently controls this perilous contest from Alpha Quad. Bourne, Payne, MTG, Holdeny, recovering Rafin and the highly distant Norchi. Dom continuously darts out from the intense rooster tails of spray, violently flashing his headlights to completely maximise the psychological torment against Daniel today. Payne lunges deep into the braking zone, but Bourne literally steps entirely out of the way. He simply surrenders third place without an ounce of resistance. What an absolutely bizarre tactical decision.
"Be water," he told his confused mechanics. Bourne genuinely believes that yielding positions passively and avoiding every fight is some brilliant revolutionary wet weather strategy to carefully preserve his heavily loaded wet tyres.
That is a truly shocking surrender from a driver usually fighting for podiums, but Payne certainly does not care how he inherits the spot. Dodgem Dom is marching on an absolutely ruthless, destructive championship warpath right now, completely ignoring the sheer absurdity of Bourne's entirely passive, non-confrontational racing approach here today. Alpha Quad violently scrapes his door against the concrete. Payne immediately reacts. The mastermind brutally punishes that slight scrape. Payne aggressively shoves his green Manicar chassis cleanly past the compromised bumper car king to brilliantly steal second place. The spectacular recovery is nearly complete.
Alpha Quad genuinely treats these immovable concrete barriers exactly like the forgiving padded walls of a Portuguese amusement park ride. However, that momentary loss of crucial forward momentum heavily compromised his entire run down the following straight. Payne flawlessly recognised the subtle speed deficit and ruthlessly capitalised instantly. The desperate mastermind is absolutely operating at peak aggression during this deeply flooded, highly chaotic street race today.
But Alpha Quad furiously bites right back. He violently hurls his heavy machine onto Payne's tail, utterly refusing to graciously concede the spot. The formidable bumper car champion seeks rapid physical track revenge.
Alpha Quad is visibly enraged. He completely ignores conventional racing etiquette, forcefully aiming his nose directly at Payne's vulnerable rear quarter panel. He wants immediate, highly reckless relentless physical retaliation regardless of the perilous standing water rapidly accumulating throughout these heavy concrete braking track zones.
While they squabble dangerously, Bourne quietly glides right onto the turbulent gearbox of Alpha Quad, perfectly executing his bizarre, highly non-combative survival racing philosophy today. Bourne surprisingly gets a brilliant exit. He flows alongside the aggressive mastermind, but Dodgem Dom forcefully slams the imaginary door shut, nearly punting the completely passive Moeller Hoche machine squarely into the towering barriers. Bourne wisely lifts off the throttle instantly, yielding the dangerous corner just as his incredibly weird B-water strategy explicitly dictates on track.
By deliberately avoiding heavy braking duels, Bourne is accidentally generating incredible corner exit momentum. He effortlessly reels Alpha Quad back in while the brawlers ahead severely overheat their rapidly degrading front wet tyre compounds.
It is absolutely baffling, but Daniel's bizarre existential crisis is genuinely working wonders. He is meticulously preserving rubber while the frantic maniacs just ahead are systematically destroying their own delicate wet...
I have just heard Tomo's engineer confirming over the radio that this torrential downpour is rapidly intensifying. The Rainstalker currently leads an incredibly tense parade straight toward impending aquatic racing disaster.
Do not ignore Holdeny cruising safely in 6th. His pure, unadulterated midfield terror has essentially transformed into the absolute best form of traction control ever witnessed on these heavily flooded street circuits.
Payne is inexplicably screaming over his radio for blue flags against cars. He is legitimately racing. The overwhelming pressure of securing this crucial championship lead while his chief rival is absent is severely fracturing his composure. He is making deeply erratic, paranoid calculations inside that noisy, damp racing cockpit.
Bourne flows like a serene river right up behind Alpha Quad's violently sliding machine. The stark contrast is breathtaking. One driver wrestles the wheel with sheer malice, while Bourne gently navigates the puddles as if he were commuting comfortably to a highly relaxing daily spa retreat appointment. The running order displays Tomo controlling from Payne, then Alpha Quad, Bourne MTG, the terrified Holdeny recovering Rayfin, and the profoundly traumatised Clinton Norchi behind. Incredible scenes under waved yellows. Alpha Quad blatantly ignores the rules and physically punts Dodgem Dom squarely into the muddy grass. The championship contender wildly pirouettes, completely off the flooded racing track.
Alpha Quad has completely gone rogue. He treated that hairpin strictly like a bumper car arena. Payne's desperate masterclass is absolutely shattered by a wildly illegal, highly reckless track manoeuvre under yellow caution.
We are hearing radio chatter from Norchi at the back of the pack. He is hysterically laughing, shouting, "Dodgem Dom finally got Dodgem." The sheer karma on these flooded Adelaide streets is genuinely brutal. Payne lived by the physical sword on lap 1, and now he perishes violently by the bumper car sword here on this exact same tricky corner.
Wait, yellow flags again. Tomo has sensationally spun the lead away. He hit the exact same treacherous puddle that Alpha Quad tested earlier. The Rainstalker miraculously catches the slide and sheepishly continues his wet race.
The marshals swiftly clear the yellow sectors. We are finally back to fully green racing conditions as these bruised and battered warriors desperately attempt to somehow survive this incredibly chaotic Australian downpour.
Tomo famously thrives in wet weather, but leading this terrifying pack clearly melted his nerves entirely. That massive unforced error proves that no driver is immune to Adelaide's relentlessly growing track puddles.
This entire event has officially transformed into a merciless emotional meat grinder. It genuinely appears that absolutely nobody wants to comfortably lead this flooded concrete death trap. Leading means you become the helpless pathfinder, desperately guessing where the lethal standing water hides, while a pack of ravenous wolves hunts your taillights through the thick blinding rain spray. Tomo slides wide once more. Alpha Quad, Bourne and the furious Payne all blast mercilessly past the struggling combustible machine as yellow flags briefly fly for the heavily compromised former track race leader.
We are officially deep inside the mandatory pit window. Dom desperately requires a flawless strategic miracle from his nervous mechanics to successfully salvage his slipping championship dreams after that earlier illegal punt.
Payne furiously dives toward the pit lane. His waiting mechanics genuinely look completely terrified as the heavy Manukar halts. The desperate mastermind is undoubtedly barking violently angry orders over the team intercom.
MTG executed his mandatory stop much earlier with zero fanfare. That entirely silent, completely overlooked undercut strategy has allowed the emotionless assassin to safely bypass all this destructive on-track chaos almost entirely.
Payne emerges, but MTG is already there. It is a breathtaking drag race between Dom's simmering rage and MTG's chillingly calm execution on fresh, wet racing rubber.
MTG cleverly hugs the warmer, drier outside line, attempting to smoothly power past Payne's violently sliding, completely cold tyres upon pit exit.
They remain fiercely locked side by side. Neither heavy Opala yields an inch through this terrifyingly narrow sector. Payne brutally pinches MTG against the concrete. A loud metallic crunch echoes as Dodge and Dom forcefully retains third position, aggressively rejecting the silent assassin's polite request for the fast racing line today.
That was highly irresponsible from Payne. MTG was clearly fully alongside, but the mastermind violently slammed the door completely shut. Anyway, Dodge and Dom clearly feels the championship slowly slipping away and is substituting precise racing craft with pure, unadulterated aggression to physically block the vastly superior momentum of MTG's cleverly executed, perfectly timed pit stop undercut strategy right here.
MTG merely absorbs the brutal contact without a flinch. He effortlessly reels the wildly sliding Payne back in, approaching the exceptionally tricky Dequetteville hairpin. The terrifyingly calm dim-up machine simply refuses to acknowledge Payne's reckless physical threats, calmly continuing to meticulously grind down the desperate championship contender lap after highly tense lap on this remarkably treacherous flooded street track. Alpha Quad miraculously leads Bourne, Payne, MTG, the recovering Tomo, struggling Rayfin, Steady, Holdemy and poor Norchi. Those top two absolutely must pit soon or face truly catastrophic wet tyre wear. Bourne's bizarrely gentle strategy has him drafting the reckless leader. The Molus Hosh quietly sucks up into the massive slipstream, avoiding entirely the blinding spray violently kicked up by Alpha Quad right now.
It is genuinely confounding, but Bourne's entirely passive be-water philosophy has unexpectedly dragged him into second place. By firmly refusing to battle those aggressive wildcards, he saved immense tyre life. Is this existential driving crisis actually pure tactical genius?
More drama. Rayfin's Soltox machine abruptly slows to a painful crawl before clunking back into gear. Those relentless mechanical demons have unfortunately surfaced once again to horribly torture him right here today.
The auditory feed from Rayfin's heavy Opala sounds horribly metallic, honestly mimicking a broken washing machine full of heavy wrenches. Overheating those delicate components repeatedly through slow corners inevitably triggers complete disaster.
Alpha Quad may currently lead, but aggressively slamming a heavy V8 across these wet curbs like a runaway arcade token is absolutely obliterating his highly sensitive, deeply grooved wet weather racing compound tyres.
Payne's race engineer just radioed a brutal message. Javib is loudly laughing in his tapas bar. Telemetry immediately shows Payne's raw pace violently quickening. That precise psychological needle firmly hit the nerve.
You can visually observe Payne drastically overdriving that green Manicar machine right now. He is absolutely frantic, completely desperate to publicly humiliate the highly relaxed, entirely absent Spanish Series Championship leader today.
Yet, MTG securely remains locked firmly onto Payne's erratic bumper. He is coldly waiting for the mastermind's violently bubbling anger to inevitably induce a catastrophic braking slide.
Astonishingly, Bourne rapidly reels in our chaotic race leader under heavy braking. The passive Molus Hosh quietly glides significantly closer while the wildly sliding Alpha Quad desperately wrestles his completely bald wet.
Daniel is positioned absolutely perfectly to capitalise if the wildly unstable Alpha Quad finally dives toward the pit lane to replace those ruined tyres. Bourne's entirely passive, non-aggressive survival strategy will literally hand him the outright lead of this motor race.
They plunge side by side toward the incredibly tight final complex. Bourne gently peeks his nose inside, refusing to force the perilous issue, but suddenly the wildly sliding Alpha Quad unexpectedly flings his battered car aggressively toward the slippery pit entry lane. Daniel Bourne completely inherits first place without ever firing a single angry shot in physical track racing anger. But look closely behind. MTG completely monopolizes the rear view mirrors of a fiercely raging Payne. The silent killer methodically amplifies the immense psychological pressure, completely refusing to grant the deeply desperate championship hopeful a single microscopic fraction of a second to calmly catch his anxious breath.
Payne physically wrestles his heavy steering rack while MTG elegantly modulates the brake pedal to gracefully close the gap. The stark contrast in their respective braking techniques vividly illustrates the massive discrepancy in their current mental stability out there today.
Tucked securely within the blinding rooster tail, MTG patiently stalks his erratic prey. The dark grey machine gets completely sucked violently forward by the massive draft off Payne's struggling white rear bumper.
We are witnessing a truly defining moment for the entire championship. This highly explosive battle beautifully pits pure, wildly unhinged desperation directly against absolute chillingly emotionless composure on a severely flooded, unforgiving concrete canyon. It is a genuine psychological masterclass unfolding right before our very own eyes here today.
They rocket down the long Brabham Straight. MTG utilises the powerful slipstream, utterly refusing to let Payne escape into the hazy Australian mist. The relentless pursuit is so intensely suffocating that you can virtually see the frantic mastermind frantically punching his steering wheel in pure frustration as the shadow constantly looms heavily in his damp rearview mirrors. Right now, the leaderboard confirms Bourne leads Payne, MTG recovering Tomo, struggling Alpha Quad, ailing Rayfin, terrified Holdeny, and profoundly delayed Norchi as this chaotic, flooded spectacular rapidly concludes today. Rayfin aggressively bullies past a completely helpless Alpha Quad. The former bumper car champion has literally zero traction remaining on those ruined wet weather tyres. Holdeny bravely slices past as well. Alpha Quad miserably spins his wildly unstable machine heavily toward the unforgiving barriers before finally managing to violently reverse the battered chassis back into the wet racing fray.
Wait, is he on slicks? Alpha Quad has completely lost his mind. He mistakenly fitted dry rubber and is treating these highly treacherous puddles like highly valuable bonus multiplier points at an arcade.
Daniel Bourne's passive Zen masterclass violently shatters, deliberately staying out excessively long proves a fatal existential miscalculation as the aggressively recovering Rainstalker Tomo executes a ruthlessly brilliant, perfectly timed undercut maneuver.
We just caught Bourne's frantic radio transmission shouting, "I was too much water, I completely evaporated." That bizarre, highly experimental passive Zen philosophy literally just washed straight down the flooded Adelaide drains.
Amidst this sprawling tactical disaster, Payne spectacularly inherits the outright lead. The desperate mastermind's incredibly chaotic, shockingly violent survival strategy has somehow miraculously worked.
Tomo smells profound weakness right now. The Rainstalker confidently and aggressively throws his combustible chassis firmly against Bourne's mirrors, purposely attempting to deliberately force another critical misjudgment from the entirely disoriented driver, actively enduring a highly...
Tomo ruthlessly stalks directly within the intense spray trailing from Bourne's reeling machine. The sheer intensity of this wet weather pursuit is blinding. Tomo brutally dives toward the wet apex. Daniel Bourne abruptly abandons his passive philosophy and violently swerves defensively, boldly fighting back against the Rainstalker through this incredibly narrow concrete track section. They spectacularly rub doors, but Tomo maximizes his vastly superior exit traction cleanly off the slippery curb to forcibly snatch third place away. The Rainstalker finally redeems his earlier embarrassing spin.
Tomo has entirely shaken off that disastrous early on-force error. He flawlessly manipulated the heavy Opala's forward weight transfer through that deeply flooded puddle, finally locating crucial mechanical grip to absolutely ruthlessly punish Bourne's momentary hesitation. That was a textbook wet weather overtake executed absolutely perfectly.
Further back, Holdeny is shockingly launching an attack. The utterly terrified midfield survivor has magically transformed his deep trauma into genuine blazing pace, aggressively hunting Rayfin's ailing Soltox for 5th position today.
Holdeny is legitimately hunting for 5th place. That crippling midfield PTSD has somehow completely inverted itself, miraculously transforming into absolute fearless confidence, navigating these terrifyingly...
We also have Norchi running 2 laps down but violently swerving to aggressively block the race leader. Clinton's burning personal vendetta against Dodgem Dom remains spectacularly alive and thoroughly dangerous out there.
Alpha Quad is currently helplessly pirouetting wildly on dry tyres through Sector 2. The incredibly aggressive former bumper car king has tragically morphed into a deeply uncontrollable, highly dangerous racing figure skater today.
We just intercepted MTG's pit radio. His race engineer simply whispered a single chilling word: execute. The silent assassin is finally rapidly unleashing his genuinely true, utterly terrifying wet weather racing.
Payne's overheated front tyres are absolutely screaming for mercy entering these tight braking zones. Honestly, his leather steering wheel must be heavily covered in deep, desperate physical claw marks by now today.
Payne profoundly understands that miraculously surviving these terrifying final laps drastically shifts the entire emotional power dynamic of this exceptionally fierce championship season firmly back into his deeply desperate club.
Daniel Bourne is entirely desperate now. That bizarrely passive philosophical mindset is completely obliterated. He is visibly violently overdriving that highly unstable Moeller Hoche machine using...
As Payne desperately leads MTG, Tomo, the raging Bourne, ailing Rayfin, surging Holdeny, the spinning Alpha Quad, and deeply angry Norchi, we focus squarely on that intense battle for 5th. Holdeny fearlessly throws his yellow chic Banderante menacingly inside Rayfin's severely smoking Soltox exhaust as they furiously navigate these treacherous racing...
Bourne relentlessly stalks Tomo's mirrors.
They violently clash. Bourne stubbornly forces the issue, clips a deeply hidden puddle, and heavily launches his violently spinning machine spectacularly into the air before miraculously landing and slowly continuing on track.
Pure disaster for Daniel. That immense blinding rage completely shattered his crucial concentration. This highly unforgiving Adelaide concrete continuously shows zero mercy whenever a driver frantically attempts to force their race.
That catastrophic impact is the absolute final nail for Daniel Bourne's race. He agonizingly discovers the hard way that artificially attempting to be an entirely different driver always ends in spectacular failure.
Meanwhile, leading the pack, this suffocating tension is absolutely reaching boiling point. MTG overwhelmingly fills Dom's terrified rearview mirrors, aggressively projecting a profoundly robotic presence that is completely devoid of absolutely...
They violently cross the line to start the profoundly decisive final lap. MTG ruthlessly glues his Dimmet machine right against Payne's completely destroyed bumper. Can the silent assassin orchestrate a winning miracle?
Dom is frantically weaving and blocking exactly like a completely desperate cornered animal. Honestly, this isn't traditional motorsport racing anymore. It has entirely devolved into a violently dangerous, highly illegal street fight.
MTG's chassis placement exhibits absolute robotic perfection. He is brutally and methodically forcing Payne to nervously slide and entirely incinerate every single remaining microscopic molecule of highly degraded tyre rubber left today.
Incredible. The silent assassin completely cracked. We hear MTG furiously screaming over his radio, demanding immediate penalties. His terrifyingly calm zen...
The time limit expires right now. This remarkably frantic, violently emotional, flooded sprint concludes the exact moment they wildly slide their battered heavy machines across that iconic painted start-finish line. Every single remaining perilous corner becomes an absolutely monumental championship-defining battle of profound...
MTG ferociously attacks. He heavily nudges the wildly swaying green Manakar bumper. Dom is quite literally scrambling absolutely all over this deeply flooded final sector to desperately block the raging...
Those completely ruined wet tyres offer absolutely zero mechanical traction anymore. Payne is miraculously surviving these final braking zones, entirely relying upon pure, unadulterated competitive malice. The desperate championship contender is quite literally sliding his deeply battered machine violently...
MTG frantically probes down the tight inside line, approaching the very final corner, but time has completely expired today.
The checkered flag emphatically waves. Dodgem Dom Payne violently drifts across the treacherous finish line to miraculously win this absolute thriller. An incredibly furious, entirely broken MTG crosses mere inches behind to agonizingly secure second...
Tomo expertly salvages a brilliant, thoroughly hard-fought...
A battered Daniel Bourne furiously wrestles his severely damaged Molus Hosh machine across the flooded finish line to capture fourth, comprehensively ending his deeply failed, highly bizarre, passive existential racing track experiment. What an astonishingly villainous, intensely desperate yet undeniably masterful victory. Dodgem Dom has ruthlessly conquered the torrential chaos to brutally snatch the championship lead while a horrified Java...
MTG finally proved he is actually human by spectacularly losing his temper at the climax, but securing this massive haul of points undoubtedly transforms the assassin into a truly terrifying title contender.
Rafin limps his violently streaming, deeply overheated Soltox V8 across the drenched line to grab an incredibly hard-earned fifth position. He miraculously survived relentless mechanical torture and constant psychological harassment just to wrestle that heavy Opala home to safely secure those highly valuable, massively critical championship points on these utterly unforgiving Adelaide streets.
And a phenomenal, brilliantly quiet survival drive.